Today I have for you two short articles from Fulton J. Sheen. They would both be considered classics, but like so many things, they got lost in the sands of time. And so thank you very much to the listener who sent me all of these quite literally clippings of articles from the Second World War era newspapers that these came from. The first article is The Decline of Indifference, and the second is on repose or leisure. Have a blessed Sunday. The Decline of Indifference by Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, published 1949. Widespread indifference to religion was one of the victims of the last war. It is now old-fashioned to maintain the pre-war attitude which held that it did not matter what a man believed, that all ideas were equally good, that truth was a relative affair which the individual mind could best settle for itself. Spiritual awareness, growing in many millions of hearts, has shown them the shallowness of such a viewpoint and has made them realize that one cannot be neutral in the war between good and evil. The old obsolete attitude regarded truth as what worked and saw the good as what was pleasurable. It tried to avoid taking a side in every struggle between moral ultimates. It said, "Truth in these large matters cannot be found. Let every man make up his own morality from week to week and discard it when it fails to suit his latest mood." But such a philosophy of indifference and indecision is no friend in a struggle. As men discovered during the war, those who were committed to no fundamental beliefs discovered that they were helpless in that struggle, having placed their whole dependence in outward circumstances. They went berserk when outward circumstances became painful and difficult to understand. Under stress, the indifferent man is the first to break. Fear and a panic need for self-preservation fill his heart because it was kept empty, swept and garnished for any emotion life might send along. There is no inner resistance to catastrophe in men like this, men whom nothing solicits, nothing antagonizes, nothing shocks. They have loved nothing deeply, and have despised nothing as really evil. When a struggle challenges them, they are either overwhelmed or they are forced to revise their attitudes and take a stand. The war destroyed many of the indifferentists, giving them mental breakdowns, turning them to self-destruction of one sort or another, but it forced the rest to abandon their moral neutrality and take sides. In the London air raids, crime went up 41%, but there was also a greatly increased spirit of spirituality, prayer, and sacrifice. In our own army, some soldiers lost their faith, but many others found it for the first time, and unprecedented numbers of veterans have joined contemplative orders of monks like the Trappists. Men found it necessary to stand up and be counted, if the crisis of the war was not to drive them mad. Catastrophe does not create character. It merely reveals the characters we have already formed. A critical moment does not make us different than we are. It only shows us what we are. Heroes are not made in battle. They are made in the years of day-by-day choices that precede the battle. A public testing of our loyalties seeks out and finds the truth about us. We cannot cram for examinations in the moral sphere. Foresters have a belief that every tree, when it burns, gives back the colors that went into its making. They see in the flaming logs the red of many sunsets, the purple of early dawns, the silver of moonrise, and the sparkle of the stars. So it is with us. What we have accepted into our hearts and made a permanent part of ourselves is given back in times of trial. One of the hidden blessings of our period in history is that it forces a decision upon many souls who have been hovering in the no-man's land of disbelief. Bolshevism's march demands that we take sides, stand up and be counted, declare our allegiance, show our faces as either for this evil or against it. Millions of the previously indifferent are being forced to a decision now, as other millions were forced during the test of the war. There is a vast silent horde of men and women who have already taken sides, although they do not put it in those terms. These are the people who have goodwill, who live up to the dictates of their conscience as they see right, who fear the approach of godlessness in the world, who pray occasionally and would like to pray more, who feel their hearts weighed down by an ennui and restlessness they cannot understand best, but are not certain of what it is, who feel themselves ready and eager to sacrifice all other values to the fullness of the truth in life, if only they were certain where it could be found. Souls like these have already made their choice. They will become polarized on the side of God. In this coming struggle, no one can be neutral. No one can retain the once fashionable indifference to the warfare of good and evil in his soul. He will have to choose. He cannot fob off the decision by a simple alignment on the right or left. The time for the horizontal groupings has gone by. From now on, the choice is vertical, and every man and woman must decide whether he will go up or down, to God or down to anti-God. Repose by Fulton Sheen, published November 20th, 1949. Never before have men possessed so many time-saving devices. Never before have they had so little time for leisure or repose. Yet few of them are aware of this. Advertising has created in modern minds the false notion that leisure and not working are the same, that the more we are surrounded by bolts and wheels, switches and gadgets, the more time we have conquered for our own. But this division of our days into working and not working is too simple. In practice, for most men, it leaves out the very possibility of real leisure. They waste precious hours away from work in aimless loafing and negative waiting around for something interesting to come along. True repose is not a mere intermission between the acts of the working life. It is an intense activity, but of a different kind. Just as sleeping is not a cessation of life, but living of a different sort from wakefulness, so repose is not an activity no less creative than that of our working hours. Repose, true leisure, cannot be enjoyed without some recognition of the spiritual world, for the first purpose of repose is the contemplation of the good. Its goal is a true perspective one, the small incidents of everyday life in their relation to the larger goodness that surrounds. Genesis tells us that after the creation of the world, God saw all that he had made and found it very good. Such contemplation of his work is natural to man, whenever he, too, is engaged in creative work. The painter stands back from his canvas to see whether the details of the seascape are properly placed. True repose is such a standing back to survey the activities that fill our days. We cannot get a real satisfaction out of our work unless we pause frequently to ask ourselves why we are doing it and whether its purpose is one our minds wholeheartedly approve. Perhaps one reason why so many of our economic and political projects miscarry is because they are in the hands of men with eyes so tightly glued to what they are doing that they never stop to question whether it should be done at all. Merely keeping busy, merely getting paid can never satisfy man's need for a creative work. A job of any kind can be lifted up and given divine purpose if it is seen in the perspective of eternity. The sweeping of a floor, the driving of a garbage truck, the checking of a list of boxcar numbers, all these can be made good through a simple act of the will which directs them to the service of God. The simplest task can be given spiritual significance and made divine. If we direct our work toward God, we shall work better than we know. The admission of this fact is another of the tasks for which we need repose. Once a week, man, reposing from work, does well to come before his God, to admit how much of what he did during the week was the work of his Creator. He can remind himself then that the material on which he labored came from other hands, that the ideas he employed entered his mind from a higher source, that the very energy which he employed was a gift of God. In such a mood of true repose, the scientist will see that he himself was not the author of his research volume on nature's laws, but only its proofreader. It was God who wrote the book. In such repose, the teacher will confess that every truth he passed on to his students was a ray of sun of divine wisdom. The cook who peels potatoes after such a period of repose will handle them as humble gifts of God himself. Repose allows us to contemplate the little things we do in their relationship to the vast things which alone can give them worth and meaning. It reminds us that all actions get their worth from God. Worship means admitting worth. To worship is to restore to our workday life its true worth by setting in its real relationship to God, who is its end and ours. Such worship is a form of repose, an intense activity and creative contemplation of divine things, from which we arise refreshed, for the promise of the gospel of St. Matthew is still waiting for those who are willing to bear it. Come to me, all you that labor and are burdened, I will give you rest.